We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right, well, good evening, good day, good morning, whatever time it is, whenever you're watching this and wherever you are on the land in this great, big, beautiful world. Let me fix that a little bit so you don't get the light in your eyes like I have in mine. Hi, I'm Pastor Brian. I'm a creator's kid, and you are too. Welcome to the Unalienable program, where we stand up for our God-given and God-endowed unalienable rights. We're here tonight to talk about some of those rights, namely our land rights. In the section from the Declaration of Independence that I just read, it says, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, interestingly enough, that last word of happiness also carries with it the idea of property. Hello, Ptah. Welcome. How are you tonight?
All right. Grand evening, Pastor Brian.
Grand evening on the land. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight because we've got a really interesting topic of land, which really kind of encompasses a lot.
That's right.
I think the other day when we talked about maybe doing this topic, we both at the same time kind of went, aha.
That's right.
Sounded like you did, because land is a deep topic that's underneath everything.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the linchpin.
Right. It's foundation, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I was saying, the pursuit of happiness, I've understood that happiness actually does have something to do with property, right?
Absolutely. I know that in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, that's what they used. They used in the pursuit of property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So happiness sort of like, was added, with Jefferson, but that was all. It always, happiness is always was aligned with the idea of property, because if you don't have property, you can't be happy.
All right, there you go. And the idea of being a landowner,
Yes,
and having all the rights pursuant to that, correct?
absolutely. This is why it's important, because the name of your show is just, if you're saying unalienable or unalienable, it all ties in together, because the total aggregate of your rights rest in your ability to have ownership of the land, have the possession of the land. Otherwise, you really don't have much rights at all. I mean, if you're paying the landlord, or if you're paying someone else who is claiming the land, then you don't have many rights.
Right. And I wanted to get right into this show without doing any promos or commercials or anything, because there's so much that can be said about this. I think that one of the biggest upfront ideas that I'd like to help get across to people who may not know is that even if you own a house and live out in the country, you probably don't own that land that you're upon. Okay.
This is right.
Right. Most people think they do. But they most probably do not. And of course, if you live in a town or a borough or a city, there's even less chance that you're going to be owning the land on which the house and your property sits, right?
That's correct.
And I think that points out some interesting differences in words again, which we turn to so much because everything that's been perpetrated upon us through law and the legal system and fraud and everything else has to do with words, doesn't it?
That's right. Words of art and word magic. Words create worlds.
Wow. Okay. And colorable law, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we're talking about the land and different words, the idea comes up of property, which I mentioned, and speaking about happiness, and also real estate. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, because there's land, there's property, and there's real estate.
That's right.
Most people get the idea, and I always did, that those three things were kind of interchangeable. You know, if you own some real estate, well, you own the property and the land.
That's right.
But that's not necessarily true. In fact, it probably is not true. If you own some real estate, you don't own the land. You might not even own the property on it, right?
That's right. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just something that's difficult for us to figure out or learn because we don't get taught that.
Sure.
And certainly real estate agent, when they sell us some real estate, they're not going to tell us that. They probably, most of them don't know it themselves.
That's right.
So you can't blame them. It's just the system that we've been brought up in and the way we've been taught and trained.
This is correct. Are you there, Pastor?
I cut myself out there somehow. I was moving the cursor and I just clicked the wrong thing. So I'm glad you stayed here. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm here till the wheels fall off.
Yeah. Did you pass along some good wisdom while I was gone, or just sit there and panic?
Just sat there, and I'm like, Pastor, you there?
Yeah, you're always cool. I know.
I thought maybe you were abducted.
Well, there you go. Well, I was actually just going to pull up some definitions here, but not necessarily definitions, just some notes I had to myself.
Yeah.
Because man's buying and selling of land really comes down to what is known as property.
Yes.
And property has to do, in this instance, with improvements on the land.
That's right.
Such as buildings or facilities of different sorts.
Exactly. Structures that sit upon the land, or what we call appurtenances and improvements. Yes. Not the actual land itself. Even the term real estate is really, it's referring to like the equitable interests in the property. It is maybe some physical attachment, but there's no bundling of rights. There's no controlling of the land itself, the soil. All right.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between real estate and real property. When you're talking real property, that's more of the bundling of not just the physical structure, but we're talking about like dominion, to where we're talking about, so many like feet up, above the earth, above the land. And and we're talking about metes and bounds. And we are, we are talking about the true ownership of what we call the allodial title. So it's not just just the physical or equitable interest in the land. It's the actual, dominion itself in the area. So that's very important to distinguish between real property, and plus it's common law is of course tied to that. So you're dealing with common law rights as well as property rights with respect to, physical possession of the land and all of its appurtenances upon which, which holds it.
Yes, yes, good, good. And property then is basically applied on top of the land.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
absolutely. Unless you make the distinction, like when you say real property as distinguished from real estate, there are key differences, key takeaways from those two.
Yeah, real estate, from what I understand, is something that's been developed. For,
Yes,
let's say that a real estate developer purchases a large parcel of land or property, and he wants to divide it up into lots and
sure.
put improvements on the lots and build houses.
Yeah,
And he has to register it and get a license,
sure.
and it becomes then registered real estate.
Right. That's right.
Uh-huh.
It, it's
For
it's
him,
it's nothing real about it at all. The idea of land is something that can never be. Uh, it's not something that can be bought or sold. It is transferred. So the term alienage, for instance, right? The law, when Jefferson talked about the law of alienage, that's we're dealing with the transfer, like the transfer of title. And so when you're
yeah,
talking about land, it's something that's granted, you know, and passed down to you. It's not something that you can buy or to sell. No one owns the land. We are merely stewards of the earth. You know, and I have some native backgrounds and kinship, and so and people say, well, the natives were here, but they didn't even look at it like the ownership of land.
right.
Nobody owns the land. It's about being able to share the land because we're all stewards
Hmm.
of the land. Okay, we're just passing through,
Very good.
and yeah, and we have we transfer it down to our heirs and assigns, as they say.
Hmm. Hmm. And God said, I created the land. You will
That's right.
not buy and sell it forever.
This is right.
Yeah, he allowed people to have dominion over it.
That's
You
right.
know, at creation, God committed the world and all its resources to humanity.
That's right.
And because we are made in the image of God, we're commanded to subdue the created order and to exercise, as you said, dominion
Yeah.
over the whole of it, including the land,
That's right.
was what we can
We
inhabit.
have to be the caretakers. We have to take care
Hmm.
of the land.
There you go.
And so
Stewardship.
it's why it was referred to in a feminine principle, because the women were associated with nurturing the land, just like
Mm-hmm.
like factories of life.
Yes.
And so yeah, and so that's why when we spoke of Mother Nature, when we spoke of nature, we spoke of it in the feminine, because
Okay.
we understand the connection between the female and the power of that organism to just generate and cultivate, and produce and reproduce.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you talk about nature. The land comes under the dominion or the law of nature, natural
sure,
law,
that's right.
where property and real estate would come under the law of man, and commercial law and contract
Yeah,
law and that kind of thing. Um,
exactly.
and it gets into the idea of greed
You sure?
and lust and all those
Yeah,
other
I
things.
mean, speculation, land speculating. Are you
Mhm.
serious? That's the fiction. That's something that emanated from man's mind. It's
Yeah.
their twisted perception of what value is. The land belongs to everybody. There's no shortage of land. There's enough space on this earth to feed and for everybody to live on. But of
Mhm.
course the control freaks out here that are running things. They you know they think otherwise. And
yes, and really in this country especially, the control and dominion of the land was to be with the people.
That's right.
Not with the government, not with the bankers.
That's right.
Not with the people who want to own and control everything. It's supposed to be delegated to the people, and it was originally. But like we find out in so many of these issues that we talk about, fraud has crept in, and greed and deception, and things have been changed and taken away from the people. And so that's, kind of why land is sort of at the root or the base of all of it.
That's the key. It's the key that ties it all together. In order for us to be truly free, we must, we must take control over the land and understand what our rights are. All of our rights are tethered to the land. You cannot have rights unless you control the land. And the cool thing about it, though, possession and common law is always going to be 9/10 of the law. So it's not like the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds can put it in their vault. It's like we are occupying the land. So that's possession. That's true possession. So that's the good news. It's just a matter of knowing, where you're at, what venue you're in, and what you are standing on. So land patents are very, very important here in updating the land patents in your proper noun name, and pursuant to the pure organic rules of English grammar. Okay, so it's a little status correction involved too. So updating the land patents, it's a very, very critical step.
Yeah, that's right. And you sent me a page about that, which we'll look at in a little bit. And I've read about this and studied it. I've never actually owned some land or property or real estate. I've moved around so much. But I recognized through a lot of the study that land was at the base of it all in more ways than one. And that you really couldn't have all the rights that you're designated without having some land.
That's
and
right.
land rights.
I lived in a city most of my life, until I got out into the county. So, I mean, imagine me living in a house and on an apartment and things like that. And I mean, living in the city was just, Philadelphia was a mess because it was like they wanted to just, pack us in, to take the people off the land, and everybody, thought, hey, let's go to the cities, and and it's like we were being fooled and tricked into believing that this was really the place. But ultimately, there's nothing like being on the land where you have space and you can grow your own food, and you can determine your fate, and that's very key.
Yeah.
So, and I do know that there are some people in Texas. Texas was the only true sovereign state. Texas never ceded their land.
That's right.
To the government. They never ceded their land nor the military. All right, that's why you have the Texas Rangers. So Texas is still a true sovereign state. So I know some people down there that are they're getting it popping. But I have not seen, like, I've seen some like no foreclosures, or and certain guys that I speak to, there's no banks, there's no feds, federal takeover, or there's no Waco type situation. There's just like just a quiet kind of like standoffish thing where they're not really bringing any heat to some of the people who are sitting on they have the allodial title, or what we call in common law fee simple absolute right to the land.
Right. Yeah, right. And Texas entered the Union as its own independent country.
Sure, absolutely.
And it won its land title by the act of war with Mexico.
That's right. That's right.
Through the peace treaty that followed that, they got the land patents and the
Yeah,
titles to Texas.
that's right.
And they did not merge those land patents with those of the
No,
United States of America when they
no,
joined the Union.
that's right.
They kept them. Right.
Yeah,
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 that's an
they kept them.
interesting thing I just
They,
learned too. And
yeah,
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
and and so and that's why it's important to for us to know, like our rights, because our rights are, they're connected to the land. See, because if we don't control the land, if we don't know our rights, we don't have any. Rights are the what we call rights. Rights are the antecedent to a remedy. So without rights, you have no remedy.
Mm. Yes, yes. Okay, good. Um, Now, you mentioned a allodial title, and there,
Mhm.
most people would say, well, but I do own the land. I have a title, or I have a title deed, or a
Mhm.
deed.
Yeah.
Um, but usually that's just controlling either the legal title or the equitable title.
Yes.
Very rarely both, because
Right.
allodial title that you mentioned, ALLODIAL, allodial title
Yeah.
basically is title to the land centered in one entity or one individual having both legal and equitable title, right?
Right. It is the highest title that you can have, that one can have. It is free of all encumbrances,
Mm-hmm.
of any liens. It's free of all liens, free
Mm,
of all encumbrances. No other person can come in between to claim that land because you have the highest title.
good.
So
Okay. And you mentioned land patent.
yes.
Um, Title is conveyed that way from, say, one quote sovereign to another.
Sure.
Um, in
Land
that
patent,
way.
just for the audience edification. Land patent is just it's only an evidence of the title to land. Land patents are usually derived, like as you said, from treaties. You
Yeah.
know, so they're
Mhm.
only passed between sovereigns. From one sovereign to another.
One king
Okay.
to another, or
Sure.
king to
Sure.
the crown to the people, or
Exactly.
whatever. Yeah, like that.
Exactly. So there's no that's what I mean. There's no purchase. There's no purchasing going on. It's like you're granting something, or you're ceding and say, hey, this is yours. Whatever. I don't want to smoke with you no more. You can have I'm backing off. I mean, look, assuming that King George the third said that with the peace treaty in 1783, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Just saying, hey, we're backing off. You can have it. Because we know why he did it, because he wanted to kind of like sneak his way back in through the banks, which is
Yes.
so that's so they said, what, we don't have to, you can have your little revolution, we'll get the country back through the monetary system. So anyway,
Boy.
that's a whole nother story, but I'm
And
just
they've
kind of
done that. Well,
yeah,
and another topic we mentioned to talk about sometime was money.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
going to
oh yeah.
be a real
Let
one
me tell you,
too.
the whole history of the United States
Yeah.
is all goes back to money. When they say follow the money, uh,
Mhm.
there you go.
Well, good. You mentioned some history, and I read about
Yeah,
this, so I was going to go through some of it because it kind of explains a lot of this, I think. Because after the Revolutionary War, the United States was assumed to acquire titles to the land here as a result of the treaties
yeah.
that were negotiated after that particular war ended. So, in the 17, you said 1783.
1783,
Okay.
was a peace treaty
Yeah. Okay.
with Great Britain.
All right. And in the 1790s or so, after the war, the original 13 colonies started acting on claims that they had asserted that they controlled and owned this land, and that their land boundaries extended far westward,
Sure. Yeah.
even into lands that had not been surveyed or measured
Right.
yet.
Exactly. Exactly. And you
Uh-huh.
you had the Northwest Ordinance around 1787, and so that clearly defined different territories. that the 13 colonies claim. And as far as even with respect to slavery, interestingly enough, because people think that the framers were not interested in trying to curtail it and to move it, all over the 13 colonies. So that's another interesting thing. But yeah, so the idea that the land is something that is not bought or sold is a point that I want to emphasize. So it can only be granted or exchanged between two sovereigns.
Okay. But the new United States national federal government had assumed a war debt.
Sure. Yeah.
From the Revolutionary War. And so they asked the states to pay the debt.
Right.
But most of the states didn't volunteer to do that. And so they negotiated a settlement that the states would give up their claims to those extended lands beyond the Appalachian Mountains,
right,
which they hadn't measured and surveyed already, and they became like territories.
Sure.
Okay?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so then the United States figured they could pay off its war debt through sale of those extended lands after it went out and had them surveyed. And Ohio was the first new state to be surveyed and brought into the Union, I read. One of the ways that the United States agreed to pay the soldiers that fought in the war was through giving them tracts of land.
Right.
Out there as compensation for their services. And so the surveyors went out and set aside an area called the military lands, I think. And they produced documents and distributed them to the soldiers that could be redeemed to acquire property out in Ohio that they could call their own. And a lot of them did, but many of them did not claim the properties because they'd have to travel so far out into what was basically no man's land at the time and start from scratch.
Yeah.
They might have families who didn't want to go there. They didn't want to deal with the harsh conditions, and stuff. And so many of the soldiers sold their land coupons to people who, wished to acquire them.
Sure. That's right.
I read George Washington acquired many of those land coupons, but that he was never able to exercise. But those are called the military lands.
Nice. Yeah. You're absolutely right about that. That's a great story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I saw another story almost just like it too. That was interesting. There was also a special tract of land there in Northeast Ohio, an area set up that was called the Firelands. Then, because there was a severe drought in Connecticut that resulted in some devastating fires that burned up and destroyed many farms and homesteads there.
Yeah.
The state and the national government agreed to allow those affected people to move into the Northeast area of Ohio, which Connecticut had originally claimed was part of their extended state lands. So they kind of made that as a part of the deal.
Yeah. I know that in 1820, some of the first land patents were granted. April, by the way, April 24th, 1820. And then we all remember the Homestead Act, because you have to understand, at the time when America was just like uncharted territory, of course the government was just giving out land and wanted people to settle on it, because the more the merrier. But there was no selling of property, or the United States didn't have any power to hold it and to you had to give it out to the people. I mean, it was our birthright. That's your birthright.
Yeah. You mentioned patents coming from sovereigns and crowns. It turns out much of the title to the land in America came from the crown of Spain.
Yeah.
With the first post-war treaty, the Treaty of Paris.
That's right.
and which the Crown of Spain issued a land patent for its land interests in America. Gave it
That's
to
right.
the U.S. government, because
Yeah.
when Columbus came here, he claimed it for the Crown of Spain,
Spain.
and
That's right.
yeah, and they had a lot of other explorers come to the coast of Florida and claim a lot of that. So they owned and claimed lots of the property
They
here
sure did. They absolutely
and
did.
transferred that. It was interesting from what I saw about the Crown of England. It said that they didn't really hold title to lands in America, that
Yeah.
the Crown did more along the lines you were talking about. They ran businesses
Sure.
and held commercial interests in America, kind of like a corporate plantation that
Right. Yeah.
and they saw us as their herds, and they did, and
Yeah.
so they didn't really have too much as far as the land patents that I could see, but
Right.
we got most of it from Spain and maybe some from France too.
In
Um,
France, yeah, in France, they helped to finance our war
mhm,
effort. So we were indebted to them, and in a multitude of ways. And
yeah, yeah, but the United States government now had land patent for titles to give out to
yeah,
people, like you were
that's
saying.
right. Yeah,
The federal government, though, was never authorized under the Constitution to actually own lands in
right.
America.
No,
The
no,
government was
they could
not.
never.
Yeah.
When you look at uh, the whole idea of like the National Wildlife Act and all this other stuff and national parks, and I mean, it's almost like it's laughable, when you look at that. Nothing in the Constitution gives them any authority whatsoever. I mean, because we go to
Mhm.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 with their jurisdiction being 10 square miles and things like that. So I mean, the idea that they could hold property and preserve this and preserve that is
Mhm.
ridiculous. You can't go
Yeah.
on this is a federal park, or this is a national area. You can't bring this. You can't camp here. It's like, are you serious?
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah, but they were able to own some land for military purposes, military bases,
well, that would be
and
under Article 1, Section 8 power for forts, dockyards, magazines,
yes.
arsenals, and other needful buildings. So it would have
Hmm.
to be within that context. It didn't mean that a court, that wouldn't include a court. You can probably squeeze a hospital in there, but it would, but they also would have to have cession, okay, of that territory from the legislature. Okay, so if the
Yeah.
state didn't cede that the territory to them, and we easily find out, like we would say, hey, Fed, okay, you said you have jurisdiction. Let me see that, let me see that title. Let me see if
Title
it was
to this.
properly ceded to you. And they hate
Hmm.
that because they
Yeah.
really can't say they're sitting on property that they were never properly ceded the title.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a
You say
lot
this
of
is a
fiction
federal
going on.
court? Okay, show me the deed
Yeah,
to the
and they don't
land that
have it.
it's sitting on,
This is
right?
what William Cooper was exposing
Hmm.
back in the 90s. It's like, they don't even have, this is not even the real United States. This is like an imposter United States. And then that's not
Hmm.
to say there aren't good people in government, because they don't know this information. There's
Right.
some good people in law enforcement. There's good attorneys. There's good
Hmm.
people in the feds. But, a lot of times they don't know what's going on. So they think that they're on the right side, but we're
Yeah.
actually on the right side of history.
Yeah. But anyway, the federal government, though, got those land patents
Yeah,
for all of the quote territories outside of the original colonies.
sure.
And the land patents applied to those areas then that were territories,
Right.
which comes under the purview, the scope or the influence of the national federal government, because
Yeah.
they controlled themselves
Yeah.
and the territories.
Right. They have exclusive
Mhm.
plenary jurisdiction over their territories. Like if you go to like Title 50 United States Code, or if you go to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, you you'll see and find that wait a minute, there's Guam, Puerto Rico, Washington D.C.,
Hmm.
the Virgin Islands, like that's their territory, like that's where they could conduct mail and do the mail fraud, because there's no such thing as a federal criminal court that would be applicable to the public at large in the several states. So it's people say, what do you mean? You mean the mail? They can't even. No, they can't. It would be, you can do the mail thing and all that within your territories. Again, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Washington, D.C.,
Hmm.
but not within several states. Your
Yeah.
jurisdiction is limited.
Although originally, there was the Northwest Territory. I mean,
Sure.
most of the states were originally parts of territories or were
Sure.
territories.
Yeah.
Ohio, the first state
Right.
outside of the colonies, was part of the Northwest Territory,
Absolutely.
and many
Yeah.
others. Oklahoma was a
Yeah.
territory first.
That's
Uh,
right.
Many, if not
Well,
most,
once
of the states were territories first.
sure, yeah. Once they were like admitted into the union,
Hmm.
that things began to really go left, if you will. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
we know, just like Alaska, and so it's like when they were part of the before they became a state, whatever. United States, would assume that, hey, you belong to us, or you belong to me, but once they were admitted to the union, the feds could no longer exercise
Mhm.
jurisdiction,
Yeah, as those
but they're
territories.
using the Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 power, and that's what's going on. It's a presumption. It's a misuse of it actually.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, they a misuse. Hmm.
Yeah, and they're using a commerce clause too, which is, everything is under commerce according to them, so they feel like they can regulate everything. So I mean, it's like a seamless garment, all of the several states now, instead of it being like individual republics of quilts, patchwork and
Well,
quilts. It's the
yeah,
way it's supposed to be.
and that's how they got control of the land, because
Yeah,
as those territories evolved into states, the states
yeah,
were surveyed
yeah,
so that the metes and bounds of the land that you mentioned were all laid out.
yeah,
And then a land or parcel of land was provided for some man or woman
yeah,
to acquire the interest in that land, to live on it,
yeah.
farm it, or whatever.
Right,
And the federal government would issue the land patent for that land,
right.
which really was supposed to totally divest the federal government of any interest in the past, current, or
Exactly.
future of that land. And the land patent provided your basis for the title, um, making it what was referred to as, what you said, allodial,
Yeah,
because
that's
it
right.
was then to one entity, one individual in legal and equitable title.
Right, the highest title, and that which you can transfer it. I mean, we're talking about holding it in perpetuity.
Hmm.
That you would
Yeah,
have that power, and you can pass it on
good. Yeah,
long
you
after you
can.
go on to your heirs or assigns. You know, and that was the power of having the title to the land. It's like in Uniform Commercial Code, they call it the holder in due course. So it's like the most powerful person or individual there in the UCC is the holder in due
Yeah.
course, the
Mhm.
secure party, support secure party creditor,
Hmm.
not the debtor.
As opposed
Which
to a debtor. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
And that's interesting, because usually, in order to acquire the land patent title, there had to be the exchange of some lawful money as
yeah,
consideration.
if you were sure, that was a part of consideration. um and because it's many parts to a contract, and also for disclosure would have to be there. It couldn't be no constructive fraud or adhesion contracts.
Hmm.
So if you were to pay, it would be lawful specie. That's correct.
And
Like gold and silver.
we're not
Yeah,
talking about Federal Reserve notes.
no
We're talking
FRNs.
about
Yeah,
lawful money,
that's right, lawful specie.
gold and silver,
Yeah,
something that's lawful actual money.
Something that would for gold, it's been considered money for the 5,000 years.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it has an intrinsic value.
and there could sometimes be some other conditions, such as you
Yeah.
have to live on it and plant,
Right. You can
farm it for
barter.
10
Barters.
years or something like
You can
that, and then the
barter if
land
you
was
want to
deemed to be
barter.
yours,
Sure. Sure.
through the
Sure.
land patent.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the patent may have been issued by the President of the United States to the governor, and maybe the state
Yeah.
handed out some of that. But I was reading about some of this, and it was interesting because it says usually land patents were issued out in sections of land,
Yeah.
usually like 1 mile by 1 mile,
Yeah.
or a half section or a quarter section.
Right.
And if you go out into rural agricultural areas, you'll see where county roads, for example, are laid out in big squares
Yeah.
at 1 mile intervals,
Right.
laying out the sections.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and you'll see in other places, like in Michigan, around or near Detroit, that there are like the 1 mile road, the 2 mile road, the 3 mile road, like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I recall actually seeing both of those layouts when I lived in Minnesota in
Yeah.
different areas, and so these pieces all come together. It's interesting. It said then the landowners would use those laid out roads to access their parcels or sections of land that were set to them by the land patents.
Right.
Yeah. Um, and as you said, back at that time, you had the land described by metes and bounds under common law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But man in his infinite wisdom came around, particularly after 1933, and they started
Yeah.
changing things.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
mhm.
The term mortgage is interesting too. You may want to define that. I mean, it means death pledge, right?
Mort,
Yeah,
morte,
mort
death.
means dead,
Hmm.
and gage means like pledge. It's death pledge, and so named because when the deal dies when the debt is paid, or when the debt is defaulted upon. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where that term originated from. From the Latin and then
Yeah.
French.
Words mean things, don't they?
Words mean things. So
Yeah.
and everything in right now is death. This is a death culture. Everything is centered around death. I mean, even when I
Mhm.
remember being in school and biology class, and they can only look at everything is dead. Like even the frog, you would dissect a frog, and you
Yeah.
can't learn nothing from a dead frog. And this is how allopathic medicine and everything is dead. Everything is just and we worship the dead. They put you on a T-shirt, or they'll put a memorial, and then and they everything is celebration of death, and you see the scary movies and the horror. Everything in
Yeah, I
America is
know.
just dead because America is dead, but the Constitution, it lives in our hearts and our minds. So we have to get out of the death culture, and
Yeah,
get
and
into
out of
the
debt.
life
Mhm.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Um, but getting back to the way they change things, you mentioned the meets and bounds and that
Yeah.
whole description of the land system
Yeah.
that they set up under surveys. But in that way, they went by natural things in the
Yeah.
descriptions of the land, like the bend of the river.
That's right.
So many rods north to the base of a big oak tree.
Sure. That's
And
right.
so many rods southwest to a huge rock. That's how
That's right.
the land was laid out and described.
Yeah. And the only thing that you could not apply the law of alienage to would be the like easements and stuff like that, or the right of way and stuff, or waterways or minerals. It's not something that you can necessarily transfer, because that was considered like, oh, that's that's out of bounds. Just so I mean, so easements and things like that, and waterways, and so that's something that no one would just try and say, hey, that's mine, unless you happen to be your backyard is a particular lake, and you
Hmm.
say, hey, you can't come and take a take a swim.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I
my
go fishing
property.
back there, but easements, I mean, if you're talking about like a general, area where people are you're flowing through,
Mm,
that's it's not something that it would be kind of like unethical if you try to claim easements, and
okay. But
yeah,
you would know that
and
your property went
right,
from the river,
yeah,
all the way down that way to the big oak tree. And
sure,
it would be described that way in the common law meets and bounds,
right,
description
that's
and
right,
measurements. That's how it
that's
was.
right,
But what
yeah,
they did in their infinite wisdom was to come around and start pounding iron pegs into the ground.
right,
Okay.
yeah,
And iron is a man made substance, it's not a natural occurrence. And so they started slyly changing meets and bounds into directions and pins. And then they started creating official government flats and stuff like that, which is a different system of measurement.
yes,
So it all comes under different rules and regulations.
that's correct,
And instead of being under natural law, it comes now under man made law.
that's right,
And so, if you want to go back to the original land patents and actually try to get some ownership, or total control, dominion over some land,
yeah.
you have to find a way to go back to the original description.
That's right. That's
Mm-hmm.
right. Because I mean, you would go initially. You would go to the county recorder's office,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you would put it in like what they call the book of life. And so you would have documentation that hey, this is a description of the property,
Mm-hmm.
and all of its meets and bounds and everything. And this is belongs to me. And so your name, your not your legal name, but your name in proper noun, um, would be on there. And so there would be no confusion, no abstract a title or anything as to who that property belonged to.
Right, right. The original description, you want to
You
lay it
were
out
a
in those
free man,
terms.
a freeholder. you know,
Yeah, yeah.
No
And-
encumbrances, no liens. No other person has any equitable interest in the property. It is yours. That means no taxes. I mean, what is that? It's like you own the land. This is yours. I mean,
mm,
so why would you pay a tax on it? Something that you own. So that's pretty much a red herring right there for most Americans. It's like, well, why do you have to pay taxes on the land if it's yours?
right, because it's not
Um,
yours,
yeah,
it's theirs.
right.
They're allowing you to be tenant upon it.
Yeah.
And I
But
don't
originally we
remember.
had the Land Patent Office, which is now the Bureau of Land Management. And
Mhm,
so and so, things have changed, but you would perfect your interest. You would perfect your rights, in the land after so many years. I believe it was 7. If nobody claimed the land after 7 years, the title was perfected. It's known as the fistful of dirt doctrine.
oh, yeah, you mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's fair. It's like, hey, man, I've been here 7 years. I built this, I built that. Imagine somebody coming like, hey, man, we were here. It's like, you had 7 years. Nobody claimed that I didn't build a home. I have children now. Come on. So, yeah. So it's a lot of strange things have happened since then.
Well,
But
and I understand you can go to land patent office. There
yeah.
there are some of them around,
Oh, yeah. Sure.
and
Sure.
get a certified copy of
Yeah.
the original land patent for
You
whatever
can perfect.
area or territory that you live in.
That's right. It's still there. I mean,
Yeah.
and so you can get the records. You can update. You just have to update the land patents. and your proper name, and so
Mm-hmm.
your status is very important. I mean, if you're um, if you're seen as a subject, you won't be recognized as the true freeholder of the land.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to you can reconvey what they call a reconveyance of the property from the county recorder's office, um, and bring it from equity to common law,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the proper way using a quit claim deed.
Yes, you have to claim it. You have to
Yeah,
claim it again. You have to
yeah.
put an update on the claim, like
There you
through
go. There you go.
through uh, through an affidavit
Yeah,
with the original or close to original description,
original description.
natural description, or even
Yeah,
a new one if it's done in that measurement system.
that's right.
You can attach one of those certified land patents that you got from the land
Yeah,
patent office and go file it in the county recorder's office
yeah, that's right.
and say, this is, I'm claiming this. You can't claim the whole thing, or that would be
Right,
fraud.
right.
But if you can demonstrate it's an area that you've been
Yeah.
on, then that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, and whatever any previous, if there were any previous obligations on the property, including on the impertinences, most likely on the improvements, is something that you would have to pay, or any other former agreements that you entered into. If you had to pay it with Federal Reserve notes, pay it, or the proper way would most likely would be nice if you could do it in gold and silver. But if you had to use FRNs to pay whatever former previous legal obligations you had on, that you agreements that you had on on that property, by all means, pay it, so you won't have to deal with the legal issues, and
Yeah.
the headache of of fighting with the government. But again, this is something that I know some people who are doing this, and so
Mm.
like I live in a house now, and I and but uh I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, well I'm sitting on property and I don't pay. See, because I do things that like under a trust, so not in my proper name. So I'm like, okay, if you're a fiction, I'm a fiction too. It's like, you want to know my mother's maiden name? Please, I don't have a mother's maiden name. It's a trust. The trust doesn't have a mother's maiden name. What's your name? So it's funny because when you turn the tables back to them and you ask them who they are, they start to squirm and feel a little funny. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a way that I personally do business in the form of like LLCs and trusts. So I just wanted the audience to know that, because a lot of times when guys get up, and they're on social media and they talk in something like and then because the fair question is, well, how do you live? So I just like to be transparent with people, just to kind of give them an inkling of what I personally do, because I don't want to put any type of information out there that would be false or would get
Yeah.
anybody, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so I always, it's
we're
all
not
about being
we're not
honest.
real estate brokers. We're
Yeah.
not
We're legal
no
advisors,
financial
as
advisor.
opposed to lawful
Mhm.
advisors.
This is
Uh,
for education and entertainment purposes
yeah.
only, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because,
Yeah.
and
But I'll say that I do most of my own business through a trust
yeah,
also.
yeah,
I'm not as sophisticated about it as you are yet, but I'm learning. And so you're right. And person can open as many trusts as they want.
yeah, you
You
sure
can
can.
start a trust and you don't have to record it or
Yeah,
register it anywhere. You just write it out in the proper format,
yeah,
and it's done. And you
yeah.
can have one the Sunshine Bliss Trust,
Right,
and it
right.
owns my car.
Yeah.
And then you set up another trust that
Let me tell you.
holds title to your house,
Yeah, that's right.
things
William
like that. So,
Cooper. William
mhm.
Cooper had some people who put up Rockefeller like trust. So this was all pursuant to the Internal Revenue Code. It's like if they didn't go after Rockefeller, they wouldn't go after you. Like there's nothing, there's no patriot guru drivel. I mean, this is stuff that, like the rich, do. It's like there's no tax haven. There's no
Right.
attempt to try to avoid taxes. This is not that crap. This is stuff that is all pursuant to the law, to their law or whatever. So everything is on the up and up. But when you set up the Rockefeller Trust and it was like a non-grantor, irrevocable trust for perpetuity, and you weren't the beneficiary, but you could designate who the beneficiary was. You were the trustee, and it was layers, like 7 layers, and it was a business trust, and then it was 501c3s and LLCs, and it was just set up beautifully for it could just run forever, and you could literally like buy back not the block, just the block. You can buy back the country.
Yeah.
But so those are like secrets that most people don't know, because the rich don't want you to know that unless you're in that club. But
Right.
just a lot of powerful stuff. So yeah, owning the land and owning your reality, taking back your life. It's a beautiful thing,
Mhm.
and it's something that we need to explore, because I still learn. I learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So I listen. That's how like I said, it's like I came out of the comments section. I'm reading comments and studying and fact checking, and I fact check myself.
Mhm.
Often when we leave here, I'll go and just say, "Hey, what did I say?" And because I'm very careful. I don't like to put out misinformation. But
Yeah.
yeah. So and I stand corrected when somebody say, "Hey, man, you got that part wrong," and we have to take it. We're big boys and girls. We can take and say, "Okay, I stand corrected." You make a retraction, and you keep it moving.
Yeah. Hey, I'm glad you mentioned the comment section or the chat, because we do have a few people here.
Okay.
I see Dom, and he
Okay.
he watches a lot of our shows. Dom
Yeah.
has a question for you. He said,
Sure.
"Peace, Ptah. What
No.
does your name mean? I know it has
Hmm.
a meaning. You want
Hmm.
to share that?"
Yeah. Well, Ptah is on Facebook. I'm known as Ptah Hotep. I call myself Ptah Hotep.
Mhm.
Ptah really means it's really associated with Peter in the Bible later, but it
Mhm.
is ancient Egyptian or Kemetic, as we say. I
Mhm.
read a little bit of hieroglyphs, so it really means like creator. What I mean? It was in the beginning where Ptah was like kind of one of the earlier gods in Kemet or Egypt, worshipped
Mhm.
at Memphis. And so it was like the divine utterance of Ptah that engendered everything in the universe. It was that sound becomes light kind of thing. In the beginning was the word that we
Mhm.
find in the Bible, and it was vibration.
Mhm.
Vibration. That's what creates the action step. Before
Yeah.
it's the thought. The unmoved mover, the preconceived thought, and then there was the word, which is vibration, and then boom, there's reality, there's existence, there's the universe. So yeah, Ptah is associated with double being and master of ceremony, a lot of different attributes.
You
Yeah,
mentioned Peter.
yeah,
Greek word was Petra,
that's right.
yeah,
Associated with the rock,
the rock.
because
Hmm.
Ptah was what supposedly came out of the waters of noon, the primordial waters of noon, and established himself on a primeval hill. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Maria Elena says hello as well, and Kim thinks that our title is a good long one. Unalienable land. I didn't know what else to say. I mean, we're talking about the land, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we're
the
on the
land.
land, and it's really behind and underneath everything when you look at
And
it and think about it.
and I want the audience to know that we're all still in the process of learning as we go along, because we're in a world now where you have to, this is on the job training.
Hmm.
And so this is learning in real time. And we can do it now. We can pull up our smartphones, our tablets, and say, hey, let me check that, while you're on a live or whatever. You can just look up stuff. And because sometimes I'll freestyle, I'll just go extemporaneously and just flow.
Hmm.
Coming out of the hip hop industry, whatever. But I like to still have material and I can look at or whatever and just make sure everything is right.
Yeah, yeah. There are still some people and families who live on the same sections of land that were originally allotted through the first land patents, and
that's right.
so they hold a allodial title over their land, but there are very few of those people anymore.
Very few, yeah, and most people really don't know much about it. So, and that's why programs like these are important, so that we can have a little bit more clarification,
Yeah,
and education, and so we can try and figure it all out together and say, hey man, let's correct it, let's claim it, let's reclaim it, and let's get this country back.
Well, and here's one other way that it gets away from people. The patents were not to the people; the patents were to the land.
Right.
And the successor who stayed on the land was the assign or the successor to the land patent. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So the original owner of the land patent, before he passed on, he could assign it to a successor.
That's right.
Now, and then the successor would own the land patent and hold the same dominion over it that the original owner had. Now, what would happen if the successor went out and, say, used the land for collateral on a loan and put a lien on it? Okay. A lien creates a problem with the title of the land.
Sure.
So the successor now has what would be called a colorable title.
Yeah.
Okay. And if he can't pay it off, and say he sells it to somebody else with the lien still on it, even if somebody else takes care of the lien and pays that, he just acquired the colorable title.
That's right.
From the other original successor, and he no longer is holding the full ownership rights afforded by the original land patent.
That's right.
And so, see, it shouldn't work that way, but that's the way it's going now.
Yeah, and that's very important, that we understand that we understand terms, and and we're very clear on what abstract the title is, what a lien is, what a deed is, what a allodial title is. Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah, you mentioned the law of alienage.
Yeah.
And I was going to look that up, and I didn't.
Yeah, that's the movement. That's the transfer of title from one to another.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and because remember the show is unalienable. So anytime you're talking about alienage, you're talking about the movement from one place to another.
Okay. And Thomas Jefferson wrote something about that, because I did look at it the other day when he mentioned it to me.
Yeah. Yeah, he spoke about that because he has some concerns about the bank, the first
setting
bank
up a national bank
of the United States in 1791, and the idea of a corporation having the power to sue and hold property and stuff. He said that was only associated with an ecclesiastical type of right, where the church could hold property or whatever. But the idea of a bank could be a corporation and a thing, and having that kind of power, especially with issuing of money, he thought that was, and like we now know, that was just it was a profane concept.
Yeah. And he had a famous quote there that I can't quite remember, but in referring to the setting up of a national bank or a central bank, having to do with land, he said, don't let them get control of that, or you'll end up as tenants on your own land.
That's right. Yeah, he said that you'll end up as he said you'll end up as paupers and poor folks on the land that your forefathers.
Yeah, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
No, he was right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, and I mean, there was some moral culpability, as we all know about Jefferson and Monticello and Sally
Mhm.
Hemings and slavery and stuff like that. And it was something that he ultimately regretted. And that's something that he knew he had to live with for the rest of his life. But he was smart enough to put all men are created equal. He didn't say all
That's
white men are
right.
created
I
equal.
mean, he
So
allowed for that to change.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that's the way it had been for a long time, and they couldn't
yeah.
change everything, setting up this new country. No one would agree to it.
Yeah, no,
So,
they would. It wouldn't have been American, if I mean, because they knew that it couldn't not be done overnight. So they said, let's get the country up, and running first, and then we're going to work on the liberation of all. You had the 1807. You had the 1807 or 1808 actually, where they had like a prohibition against importation of slaves and things like that. Africans, whatever,
yeah,
from Africa and stuff. And then there were ways where they got around that, where they didn't, hold up to that. But the idea was there. It was well intentioned, where they were
yeah,
trying to work hard to just have the country set up and not have to sleep at night knowing that, like, wow, how can we talk about liberty and we still have slavery, so we can not going to let it come in these territories, or it can't go past, it can't be no westward, or it can't be all in the Northwest territories. It can't, so those are the things that a lot of the media tend to overlook.
right. And he and they put together some very well crafted words and
Yeah,
ideas that allowed for the right kind of country government under God,
yeah,
where all men are created equal,
yeah,
which
and
we
and
have been able to take advantage of, but
no, not at
we
all.
have been losing.
Look at the amendment process. I mean, what could be? It's not like it's a proprietary software like Apple. It's like
Yeah,
it's an open source. The Constitution is like an open
yeah,
source code where you can make amendments and you can make it better. So that's dope to me. I think that's cool. That's
yeah.
that's that's cool as heck.
Amen. Amen. So, well, I think that's a good discussion tonight. I think we covered a lot about the land,
Yeah,
and what it is that God says you shall not own and sell the land forever. The
yeah,
land is mine. I made it, and even in the Bible, the whole concept of the Jubilee, and
yeah.
every
Stretch
7
Jubilee.
years you're supposed to give the land a rest.
That's right.
You
That's
know, and
right.
we don't. And then
That's right.
every seventh group of 7 years,
Yeah,
a year of
we.
Jubilee comes in, and any debts on the lands or any
Yeah,
liens are supposed to be erased,
right.
and the land
Well, they do it now
given
with your
back.
credit. They do it now with your
Mhm.
credit report or whatever.
Right.
Supposedly,
Amen.
it's
So
just
we could go on for a while, but I think that's good for tonight. I enjoyed talking about with you that with
yeah.
Ptah, and
Always a pleasure. We go in the best we can. So, yep. It's all a learning process. I had a great time.
yeah.
And yeah,
Amen. And thank you all for watching tonight. I hope you picked up some helpful information. Don't believe us. Do the research yourself. And before you
yeah,
go out and try to do anything that you heard from us or thought we may have suggested, make sure that you learn, do the research, and try to meet and talk with other people of like mind too. And we hope this program helps. You can write to us at unalienable@mail.com if you like. All right. Well, have a great night, Ptah. We'll do
all
this
right.
soon, okay?
All right. Thanks for having me, Pastor Brian. And I want to wish everybody a great and peaceful evening, a grand evening. Stay free and restore this republic.
Amen. Amen. Peace, shalom to you.
Peace and shalom to you, brother.
Amen. Bye. All right. I knew that'd be a good discussion. So, again, hope that you gain some knowledge about this country and about the way things work and don't work. Hopefully will help fill in some of the gaps that you weren't aware of before, maybe give you some extra motivation and knowledge to help you move forward, to help us all restore this republic and this country back to the way that it was originally intended to be. Instead of doing any promotions tonight, I'm going to let the program end with that, because I think this was very profound. It certainly was for me, and very thankful that you all join us and that you care enough to spend the time listening and viewing something like this, because that tells us we all still have hope and that we're going to make it if and when it's God's will. So once again, I'm Pastor Brian. I'm a creator's kid, and you are too. God bless.